An epic poem is a long narrative poem about great men and women who, in dealing with gods or other superhuman powers, shape the mortal cosmos for their descendants, the poet and their audience, to define themselves as a group or a nation. Today we're going to take a look at the story of life, death, immortality, and the great flood of ancient times. Hi, I'm Rob, and this is The Constantly Racing Mind, and we are looking at Tablet 11 from the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh is an ancient Mesopotamian epic poem that is considered the oldest surviving noteworthy literature and the second oldest religious document after the pyramid texts. Gilgamesh's literary history begins with the 5 Sumerian poems from the Third Dynasty of Ur, that's 2100 BCE, about Bilgamesh, that's Sumerian for Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. The poem is later 2nd millennium BCE epic poem written in Akkadian. Now, Gilgamesh was most likely a posthumously deified historical monarch of the Sumerian city-state of Uruk. Now, his reign most likely began at the start of the Early Dynastic Period, that's Mesopotamian Dynastic Period. However, he rose to prominence in Sumerian mythology during the Third Dynasty of Ur, that's circa 2112 to circa 2004 BCE. Now, if you're new here, we cover the film genres of sci-fi, horror, action-adventure, prop culture, and all things geek. If you want more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to be aware of my new content. Gilgamesh's legendary deeds are recounted in 5 Sumerian poems that have survived. The earliest of these is probably Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld, in which Gilgamesh saves the goddess Inanna from the demons that have infested her huluppu tree. Now, these stories are later weaved into a coherent narrative in Babylonian times, based on much older source of material. The standard Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh was penned by a scribe named I can't even say his name, look right here, most likely during the Middle Babylonian period, which is circa 1600 to circa 1155 BCE. Now, Gilgamesh is a deity with tremendous strength who befriends the wild man Enkidu in this epic. They go on numerous adventures together, the most famous of which is when they battle Humbaba, that's Sumerian Huwaha, and the Bull of Heaven, who are sent to attack them by Ishtar, Sumerian Inanna, after Gilgamesh rejects her invitation to be her consort. Gilgamesh feels scared of his own death after Enkidu dies of illness sent by the gods as punishment, and seeks immortality from the sage Utnapishtim, a survivor of the Great Flood. After a long journey, Gilgamesh recognizes an old man as Utnapishtim. He is the one who's been looking for. Now, as a result, he asks the question for which he has journeyed so far and endured so much. How did Utnapishtim, a mortal man, become a god? How had he managed to avoid death? Is Gilgamesh ever going to be able to do the same? Utnapishtim, a survivor of the deluge that nearly wiped off humanity, recounts his ordeal. He claims to have been the king of Uruk, a lovely, rich city on the Euphrates banks. And the gods met in secret council. Anu, the god of the firmament, Ninurta, the god of war and wells, Enlil, the god of earth, wind and air, Ennugi, the god of irrigation, and Ea, the cleverest of the gods, the god of wisdom and crafts. Enlil commanded a deluge to wipe all humanity. Ea had been bound to secrecy, but he deceived Enlil by revealing the god's plans. He recounted the plans to the walls of his dwelling, while Utnapishtim heard everything on the other side of the walls. So did he really tell Utnapishtim? Ea forewarned him that the gods would unleash a devastating deluge. He commanded him to build a boat with enormous dimensions, 10 dozen cubits in height, that's about 180 feet, 6 decks and 1 acre of floor space, and fill it with the seeds of every living thing, as well as his family and their belongings. When Utnapishtim asked him what he would tell the inhabitants of Uruk, who would have to help him build it, he offered an ingenious deception. Tell them you're leaving the city because Enlil despises you, he added. Tell them that when you depart, the city will be showered with good fortune, that all kinds of bread and wheat will fall from the sky, that they will be able to devour more than they can conceive. Now, Utnapishtim provided the workers with butchered bulls and sheep, as well as rivers of beer and wine to drink. It seemed like we were at a festival. The boat was ready in 7 days. They launched it into the Euphrates with great difficulty. Utnapishtim handed him his house and everything in it after Puzaramun, the Kulkar, had sealed him inside. Now the gods climbed as high as they could to escape the storm and trembled in horror. Ishtar cried as she watched the children perish. The boat eventually got aground on a mountain summit. Utnapishtim released a dove after 7 days. It returned to the boat when it couldn't find a dry place to land. A swallow was released by Utnapishtim. It too came back. Then he unleashed a raven, which never returned. Sound familiar? When Utnapishtim arrived at the shore, he prepared a sacrifice. The gods of heaven had assembled around the altar because they were hungry. Ishtar descended wearing a lapis lazuli necklace and fly-shaped beads. She said she would forget neither her necklace nor this calamity. Nor would she forgive Enlil, since the flood was his idea and he never discussed it with the other gods. When Enlil arrived to partake of the sacrifice, he saw the boat and lost his temper. He demanded to know how anyone managed to avoid being swept away by the flood, which he planned to wipe out everyone. Ea spoke forward after Ninurta named the perpetrator. He scolded Enlil for causing the flood, telling him that if he intended to punish someone, he should have tailored the punishment to the crime. Not everyone was deserving of death. He claimed that epidemics, wolves, and hunger might be utilized to kill a subset of the population, rather than the entire population at once. So, let's take a look. Yeah, I know it says eBay, but I did get this off of Etsy. I've ordered treasures from Real Art before, both on Etsy and on eBay. Now, my Indiana Jones and Peacock Eye, that's from James, the King Arthur Cross of Camden, and my Dune Chris knives were purchased from James at Real Art. And as always, there is some promotional material. In this case, there is a book on the cuneiform tablet. Now, very quickly, the book covers some interesting tidbits of information, such as Abraham coming from Ur of the Chaldees or Chaldeans, Zechariah Sitchin and the 12th planet. He discusses that a little bit because he feels like it does kind of intertwine to some degree. The book discusses the history of the tablet, including its initial finding by Hormuzd Rassam. He was an Iraqi Assyriologist who made many important archaeological discoveries from 1877 to around 1882. And from a working class family, there was George Smith, who was an apprentice to the London-based publishing house of Bradbury and Evans, to learn banknote engraving, at which he excelled. Now, however, from his youth, he was fascinated with Assyrian culture and history. In his spare time, he read everything available to him on the subject. Eventually, this amateur was able to translate cuneiform tablets relating to the story of the flood. Now, this all happened in around 1872. Now, this tablet is 5.25 inches, or 13.3 centimeters tall, and 4.625 inches, which is about 4 5/8, which is actually about 11.75 centimeters in width, and about 3/4 of an inch, or 1.9 centimeters thick. Now, there was 12 tablets that make up the whole Epic of Gilgamesh. We just took a look at tablet number 11. If you like this content, please consider supporting the channel with Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, and I do want to thank you guys for your support. I really do appreciate it. And Iraqi archaeologist Taha Bakir produced the first straight Arabic translation from the ancient tablets in the 1960s. And the book also discusses the epic relates to later flood text. Now, several ideas, plot aspects, and characters in the Hebrew Bible correspond to the Epic of Gilgamesh, including the Garden of Eden narratives, Ecclesiastic's admonitions, and the Genesis flood story. So it's not a line-by-line direct narrative, but there are those who believe that the biblical account in Genesis and Noah was a later retelling of this ancient story. Remember where Abraham came from? Now, I know this is not the typical movie prop video, but I felt the story was interesting from an ancient alien perspective and a historical perspective as well, because these were all the Sumerian gods that we're talking about through a later translations of Akkadian and Babylonian. So do you believe in the Noah's Ark story? Or do you believe that the Gilgamesh-Utnapishtim story is the basis of the Judeo-Christian flood narrative? So let's discuss this in the comments below. Like and share this video, and you know what to do. Take care.